before, that's where attitude and perspectives come into play. Like, for example, okay, Paralympics, Olympics, that's good enough. We don't need to expose any others.
So I mentioned to that earlier about hard of hearing people. They do try to hide their hearing loss, and they don't want others to see it because they know that they will be viewed as less. Hard of hearing people, in my opinion, they see themselves as more disabled. Deaf individuals who are confident in who they are, there's nothing wrong with them, and they'll tell you that too. If you meet a culturally deaf person, they are very visual. They may be very blunt. Sign language is very demonstrative and very visually based. So I've had people come up to me before and go, "Hey, Rebecca, how you doing? Wow, I think you've gained 20 pounds. Are you all right?" You know, and they're just like all about that, you know, and there was no harm. There was no malice in that. They were really concerned. "Oh, Rebecca, what's up? I thought you were on a diet," you know, and then they go from there. So they may be blunt, they are visually based, but hard of hearing people know. If everybody is at the water cooler, they're having a conversation about the Christmas party, they know, they can see them talking, they know what's going on, but they don't know if those people are talking about them or not. They don't know, you know, and they kind of have a heightened sensitivity to what they're missing and missing out on.
And speaking of sensitivity, deaf people can be quite sensitive. For example, if I feel something going on around me, maybe behind me, and I look back and I see people talking, I'm going to look at their faces as they're having an exchange. It might lead me to believe that conversation, there is a sensitivity there, a vibe that you get, that you can pick up on. And sometimes you know it, it just turns up that sensitivity for us. And it will tip me off, but it will always make me question, is that about me or is that about something else?
So talking about communication barriers, how can you set up that communication effectively? When you ask questions, try to avoid yes and no questions, because you're going to get a head nod from a lot of deaf people. You want to ask something to gauge their understanding. You want to check in with them, like, what did you do? You can ask leading questions. If you give them homework, you can ask them, what was your homework? Just to check in with them. Ask open-ended questions and try to get them to tell you a story. Sometimes they're going to go way off topic, but let them, just be patient and let them tell their story. Because for a long time, maybe no one has listened to them. And just once you've gotten that story out, that's going to build that rapport and trust. And then we're going to talk about how to use interpreters. Remember, we've said you want to avoid watching the interpreter, look straight into your deaf client's face, and they'll facilitate the communication. I have an example from one case. It was a deaf woman who did not know American Sign Language, and she could speak for herself. But I went ahead and had an interpreter there to meet with this client. She gave me her audiogram, and as I looked at it, she was profoundly deaf. She couldn't even hear at 100 decibel level, but she was speaking. And you know, I'm deaf, but as I was going back and forth with her, I was surprised. She was able to understand her very well. So I asked the interpreter, did they speak clearly? And the interpreter said they were extremely clear, very easy to understand. So the next meeting, I made an appointment with her, and as we were interacting, I asked her. She told me how that she learned to speak so clearly. And how she did it was, she had to practice every day after school for 6 hours. She had speech training, and that was between 10 to 15 years. Can you imagine her experience, which meant that she was going to be missing out on that social interaction, and that she didn't have opportunities to participate in sports. She just had that, she was the only deaf student in a mainstream school. So her whole childhood was school and speech training, school and speech training for years. So, you know, I asked her if she was able to interact well with other people, and she said, well, not really. I still have to depend on other people to communicate. And it was an interesting situation because, of course, not all deaf people can speak clearly. It just depends on the individual.
And really, for the individual, you want to utilize their preference. They may not come in and say, hey, my name's John and I'm hard of hearing. They're not going to identify in that way. You're going to tease out that story, and then you're going to try to find what are the communication strategies that work best. We've gone through the list of course, interpreting. We have note-taking. We have 2 keyboards. We also have CART, which is computer-aided real-time transcriptioning. So a person remotely is on my phone, and they are like typing everything that has been said today, so that we can have a transcript of this, but also if a person's hard of hearing, they can watch that to read that at the same time. We talked about another strategy of using questions to reinforce communication and not just yes and no. So in a few minutes, we're going to have 2 client scenarios that we're going to ask you to think about what you would do. If a client showed up at your office, what are those strategies and what would you need to do with that? And then for interpreters also, I think I covered that earlier. Their role is strictly taking language A, and getting it to language B, and then language B, translating it or interpreting it to language A. They don't add to, they don't take away from. They're ethically bound to deliver the message as accurate as possible. So they're not going to drive your client to the appointment. They're not going to answer the client's questions for them. If your client doesn't understand the question, and maybe it is, you know, you're asking something about a technical question, or I don't know, maybe if they're an accountant. The interpreter is not an accountant. They may not understand what the tax form is or something like that. But the duty of clarifying that falls on you, the counselor. So if you're telling your student, perfect example, I need you to bring me the student aid report from the FAFSA. If your student that you're working with is sitting there going, huh, what? You know, the interpreter is not going to elaborate on that and tell them to go check their email and all that. The duty of that conversation is you as the counselor. They are just a microphone. Language mediator.
So it's important to emphasize that here at GBRA, we only hire certified interpreters. And a lot of people will try to use family members or something, or parents will come in and say, I'll interpret for my son. We don't allow that here. We don't know the level of skill that that family member may have, how effective their communication would be with their child. So it's important that we bring an interpreter to make sure that the information is accurate and there are no gaps, nothing missing.
I had a client ages ago whose mama said, oh no, don't worry, I'll come with my client. I mean with my kid. And I didn't tell her, hey, I know sign language. You know, I didn't do nothing. Sure, come on. He was a transition student at the time. You know, I was trying to be nice to mama. The mom thought she was going to interpret the conversation for the student, ultimately, so the student's benefits would not be in jeopardy. Because mama wanted to know what's going to happen to my son's check if he goes to work. Well, when she shows up and gets halfway through attempting to sign, I just said, hey, let me help you with that. I got this, we're good. And then I was able to sign and explain everything clearly. I tried my best at sim-comming, which is talking and signing at the same time. But I also was able to have a small conversation with that client alone as I was going to the copy machine to make a copy of their driver's license. So I was well aware of what was up. Please do not ask your potential client, hey, can you bring somebody with you? Can you bring a family member with you? No, we don't want our process to be at their risk. Because if they are trying to play us, or if they're trying to play their client or the student, or we don't know. It's best to have a non-biased, neutral, certified interpreter.
All right, we've already covered these.
Yeah, let's see. Got CART, C-print, which is another type of transcription.
Speech to text. There are some apps out there now. If you have an iPhone in the Notes app, you can speak and it would translate it into English. Again, it's going to require a quiet room, one-on-one, and does your client have the good enough literacy skills to communicate in English? And if they're able to understand you, it's individualized.
But for a short communication such as, hey, potluck on Friday after the staff meeting, you can use speech to text or whatever app you have, put that on there and show, maybe it's your deaf staff coworker. That's perfectly acceptable. We want you to use those types of strategies for interaction. And I think we got most of this. Interactive typing we talked about. Speech to text, yeah, we're good on that. Woo-hoo, we're moving right along. We're going to beat the vice president.
That's right.
To Atlanta. We're
That's
going to
right.
beat the vice president to Atlanta. Let me clarify that.
So as you can see from this cartoon here, the deaf person, there's another person who's reading the English, and they're trying to follow the instructions on how to build this model airplane. But the deaf person has envisioned the airplane first, and then they put it together without the instructions. Because deaf people are visual.
Yep.
Have any of you heard of the term autism? Anyone?
Miss Adrian has. She's been around us. She knows. We baptized her.
You've heard of racism, right? Yes.
There's many isms.
A lot of isms, but autism is related to deafness. It's oppression of the ear, auditory, oppression of deaf people. So when you think about, as a white, I'll identify as a white male, but I identify first as a deaf person, not as a white person or a male. I identify as deaf. I'm deaf. Doesn't matter if I'm black or Asian or Latino. I identify as deaf person first. And then I'll have a second, third, fourth identity. So imagine if there's a woman so is a black woman, and society's going to say, okay, I'm oppressed as a woman, I'm oppressed as a black woman, and those frustrations are compounded. Now imagine you have a woman who's black or African American and deaf. That's going to be a triple form of discrimination and the experiences of frustration. So as a white man, I experience the deaf oppression only as a deaf person. So everybody's experiences are going to be different. And that's why it's so critical as you get to know your client and you learn what their story is. Get to know them. Let them tell you their story. And that way you'll be able to understand and be able to appropriately meet their needs and eventually get them to work.
All right, we're in the home stretch. Are you ready? Okay, so this is going to be a communication role play. We would like for you to pair up with the person next to you. We're going to try that just for a minute and give you a couple of minutes to talk about it. Act it out, baby. And then we're going to ask for a volunteer to come up and role play this for us. Tammy, I know you're good at that. You can come on up. Yeah. So first, the first client who just popped in has a sensory neural hearing loss. They have always done manual labor, and really his hearing loss now has had a significant drop. So he went from having some hearing loss to now no functional hearing loss. Nerve damage, just a side note too, sensory neural is nerve damage. So once it's gone, it's pretty much gone. He has no idea of what he can do. If he can still continue at the work that he's doing, he can't imagine working with his customers or utilizing an office with phones. So what would you do? What kind of questions would you ask this person? What would you think about? Just for, imagine if you were doing a basic demographic sheet in Gracie. You know, of course you're going to do name and address and all that. But what is pertinent for you to know for that next step? And how would you interact with them? So remember those communication strategies we talked about. Think about what would be important for this gentleman. All right, talk amongst yourselves for just a few minutes.
That person might have, you know, look at this other skill and that was the
It's always been, but now I'm retiring, and getting my retirement stage, and I want to see. So none of the circumstances change, he was ready to So he's basically working in systems with him out too. So basically that point is collecting for So it's like a thing that kind of situation, I was like, this really kind of stuff, this is how it's working. So he basically worked the system out.
we talk about that that their skill level what they like what it's like, and it will narrow some things down as a job right. Okay. Yes. But they're gonna focus more on what their abilities are than what a combination. And then probably what I would do is start looking at, say, they're really good at, they're not very good at working around which, you know what I mean, they may be, and I would imagine if she has hearing impairment and she has LD, I she has personally, unsuccessful, inadequacy, unsuccessful, you know, that sort of thing. So my thing would be definitely to try to don't sign this to her team.
And so I've always babysitting on the side, and then she's like,
Moments are like 2 years, 4
I'm trying to like, do everything, I don't want to
You can do like cuts. Also, they're
all right.
But it's not like every conversation's got to be
Okay, all right.
But when I'm
Sounded like some good conversation.
suggestions as far as how
Y'all made Jerry mad at me. Just been introduced to the deaf wave. All right, so I think, don't start filling out the evaluation yet. We still have one more exit. That is Johnny on the spot this morning, or this afternoon. Two brave souls. Anybody want to be the OA or the CA as the person pops in? And no brave soul? I might have to call those people. We need two participants. Yes, come on up. The price is right. That's right. So I need one more person. One person is going to role play being the VR worker, who happened to be the lucky one who answered the door. And then we'll have the person with sensory neural hearing loss who just showed up and said, I need y'all to buy me hearing aids. No, just kidding. I know. Yeah, they do. That's not the, yeah, they do. Any other volunteers? One more. Okay, come on. Come on, Erica.
Nobody else is volunteering, huh?
All right. All right, you were the first one, so you get first choice. You want to be
counselor.
Okay, come right here.
Yes, I'm not super
If you don't
familiar with
mind,
your
yeah.
counseling
Or
person, so I
maybe-
feel like it
yeah.
would be, okay.
Some right, right. I'll step out of the way, step back just a little bit so you're not in the way of the information. Okay. And then, yeah, there we go. Awesome. Sorry about that. You are on camera. Yes. And you're being recorded, so whatever you say. will be
I know that's right.
I know it, there we go. Okay. So Alicia, you are the VR person?
Yes.
Okay, you have the company shirt on. And this